In today's episode, we'll take a look at the Sound Devices MixPre-6. A lot of this also applies to the MixPre-3. I have had this for approximately 48 hours, so this is just an initial impressions, not a final review. We'll have the final review coming later, but let me just give you kind of a quick look at my impressions so far. I have used it for one professional job so far, and let's talk about it really quickly. First of all, most importantly, how does it sound? Well, this entire thing is being recorded with the MixPre-6, and let me give you some sound samples with different microphones as well. Here's a sample with the MixPre-6. With a DPA 4017 shotgun microphone, boom, just out of the frame here. And what else can I tell you? We're just recording this single channel. This one does require some phantom power. I've done no processing except to normalize this to minus 23 LUFS, just so that we have the loudness consistent between the different samples that you're going to hear here. So we're pairing this up with a pretty good microphone here and the Kashmir preamps in the MixPre-6. Here we have the Audio-Technica 4053B as a sample, again going into the Sound Devices MixPre-6, and the no high-pass filter or I think there's also a pad on this microphone, so it can be used as an instrument microphone. Neither of those are on, so this is what it sounds like here on the MixPre-6. The high-pass filter is set to 40 Hertz, so it's a very mild high-pass filter and really should just take care of any rumble. I don't think there's really a whole lot of that going here in this room at this point, but that's often how I would shoot. Next up, we have a sample here with the Rode NTG2, which is a more prosumer-oriented shotgun microphone. Again, boom, just out of the frame here. I probably just cut into the sound by moving my hand in front of the mic. Going straight into the MixPre-6, and the gain is set right now to 57 out of 75. So just to give you a sense, this is being phantom powered by the MixPre-6, and that's what it sounds like. Next up, we have the Electro Voice RE50L, which is a kind of a stick reporter's mic, as they're often called. This is a dynamic microphone. It does not require phantom power, but it does require a fair bit of gain, like most dynamic microphones, and this is what this one sounds like. This is an interesting device. This is Sound Devices' first kind of prosumer grade product, as far as I can tell, at least on the sound recording side. And what's interesting about it is that it's kind of targeted to an audience that is more in the videography world, maybe a YouTube or enthusiast filmmaker, producer, creator, and also maybe a mobile musician. So it's a little bit different than their prior releases in the sound recorder market, which was very much focused on professionals. So it's a really interesting idea. And what they've really done from my perspective, if I had to kind of encapsulate the whole idea, is that they've taken the very most important features from their higher level recorders and put those in here and left out the stuff that non-professionals probably don't generally need. So let's kind of review that really quickly and see what those things are. First of all, in terms of pricing, the MixPre-6 comes in at $900 US at the time of release, and the MixPre-3 comes in at $650 US. Let's give you a quick tour of each of the panels here. First of all, in the front, you can see we have just a small screen here, a very nice full color screen, and it is a touch screen. So it's also the menu for most of the things we're going to need to do. Since we're recording, some of the things are grayed out here, you can see, but it works very nicely. It is quite small, and in fact, I was a little bit concerned when I first saw that, but the way they've implemented the menus, it works quite nicely. You can see that each of the buttons are fairly large, so it's easy to hit them. I have actually very, very large hands. But you can scroll through very quickly using this little panel here. This will take you back home. This will allow you to change the headphone routing, and just works really, really nicely. So I'm really happy with the screen. Also, this is bright enough. In fact, I don't have it at the max brightness right now. This is kind of the midway point. You can brighten it up even more, and so it is completely viewable and usable outdoors in the direct sunlight. So they've done a nice job there as well. Then we have, of course, the faders for each of the 4 main inputs. We have the transport controls up here, record, stop, play, and we have this asterisk button as well. These, of course, do exactly what you would expect, and the asterisk button is actually assignable. You can have it do a variety of different things. I have it set up to do what they call undo, which is, I believe, very similar to what is called false take on most pro recorders. So if you accidentally start or you purposely start a recording and for whatever reason you have to scrap that take and go back and do it over for whatever reason, say for example something malfunctioned on the camera or somebody wasn't ready on the set or whatever, and they decide to go back and redo that take, you can just press that button really quickly and it undoes that one, goes back to the same number you were going to record to before, erases the old one, and you're ready to go. So then, of course, not only are these acting as faders, but they also allow you to get into the input menu for each of these. So for example, if I want to get into the input menu for input 1, I just press that. You get a couple of options here. You can solo that particular input. You can arm or disarm it. You can only do that well. It's grayed out right now because we're recording, but here's where you set the gain for that input. Right now I have it set to 60 out of 75. And here you can control your pan, and I can scroll through. There are a bunch of things. We have a low cut filter, which is nice. You can switch the phase if you need to. Turn phantom power on or off. Currently it's off, good. Right now I have the input set to mic mode. Those are getting grayed out because we're recording right now. I could change that to line level as well, which is great, and that's really useful in cases where I'm taking a feed from a soundboard, for example, recording a concert. Here you can also apply a delay. So that's usually if you have some sort of, for example, if you're working with a particular camera that you often work with and you find that the camera takes a period of time to write the video to the card within the camera, you can actually apply a delay here so that the sound will still be in sync. That's a very useful feature as well. I've noticed that that's useful with my Panasonic series cameras. My GH4 needed something like that, so really nice to have something like that. Okay, so that is pretty much the front panel. Oh, of course, around each fader, you also get this LED that shows you when you're getting signal on that particular channel. So that's really helpful in identifying which channel you have. Of course, you can change the meter view to a variety of different things. So here, for example, is just the stereo mix. Here is the mix plus the individual track. So I'm just recording on track 1. And then here, if I'm going to use it as an audio interface, it will also show me what I'm getting from USB 1 and 2 back from the computer. So if I'm playing back stuff from my computer on here, I can also get those meters there. So a variety of different meter views as well. Down at the bottom of the screen, you have the routing for your headphone mix. So here, for example, I'm listening to the left-right stereo. I can go in and change that. I can listen to the left-right mono, USB 1 and 2, USB 3 and 4, some presets. You can edit your headphone presets, and you can tell it how you want it to solo. So again, a variety of options there. Then over on the left-hand side, it shows you how much time you have left on this particular chord in terms of recording time. So we have right now about 20 hours and 24 minutes, so we should be just fine. All right, let's take a look at the different side panels here. First off, on the left-hand side panel, we have inputs 1 and 2. These, again, are XLR combo TRS inputs. These are mic level or line level inputs, which is fantastic. Again, so if I need to take a feed from a soundboard at a concert or some other event, I can get a feed from the soundboard, which is, again, something I've done a number of times, and it's really nice that we can do that here. We have our stereo output, which is a 3.5 millimeter unbalanced stereo output. I want to address this right here. I know some people had expressed some concern or disappointment that it's an unbalanced output. I want to put that into perspective here. The thinking is, for most people, that, okay, unbalanced is not as good as balanced. And I guess that's true if you're, if you're trying to do a long cable run, which is the main advantage of balanced. If you want to do a long cable run and not pick up any interference, then balanced is better than unbalanced. However, I think what's important to consider is that for the target audience, very rarely do we need to do long cable runs on the outputs. So here, for example, if you're going to mount this underneath your camera, the run from here to your camera is extraordinarily short. And I would say my kind of rule of thumb is anything under, like 5 meters is really, you're pretty, well, I would say if you want to be really safe, maybe 2 meters. And that's up for debate, and it depends on where you're at and how much interference there is. So there are a lot of factors, but don't sweat it necessarily. This is not necessarily a deal killer. Certainly it is not for me. If you're going to run outputs to your camera, or if you're going to be using this in audio interface mode and want to run outputs to your powered monitors, then this should work just fine, because in most cases when you're working in a sort of an edit suite or recording studio or whatever it may be, you don't need to do a really long run. You only need to run it a couple of meters to get it to each of the speakers. So you'd need a 3.5 millimeter kind of splitter cable to take it out to maybe RCA inputs onto your powered monitors, or however those work. So that is my thought on that. So for me, again, not a deal killer. It may be for you, depending on what you're trying to do. So in that case, you may need to move up to a device that does have balanced outputs. Next up, we have some USB inputs here. We have a USB-C input and a USB-A input. The A input is for connecting a keyboard, so you can edit metadata on the files. So that is, for example, to rename them, to make notes about each of the takes, and things of that nature. That is a super nice feature to have here, and it's a USB-A, so it's a full-size USB input. Great option there. USB-C here is actually for powering the device and actually hooking it up to your computer to use as an audio interface or to transfer files. That's great from my perspective that they went with USB-C, the new standard. In fact, let's show you here. What comes with the device is this cable here that allows you to connect a USB battery, and in this case we have the USB-C on this side, which goes into the MixPre, and then you have what they label here as a power and data cables. If I press the power button, you can see now we've switched on the main screen there in the upper right. You can see now we've switched to USB-C powering. So that is fantastic. It does have two inputs here, which is important because the power specification for USB was for only 5 volts per connector with prior to USB-C, and this needs a little bit more than that. So the way they've solved that problem is they give you this splitter cable that allows you to do 2 inputs. So here, for example, I'm using this LifeCharge USB battery to power now the USB via USB the MixPre-6. So that's a pretty cool feature there. And then, of course, also on this side we have our on-off switch. So I'm going to pull this out for now. We'll come back to that. All right, then over on this other panel on the right-hand side, we have the headphone output. It is a 3.5 millimeter headphone output. And what I can say is about the headphone amplifier in the MixPre-6 is fantastic. This was sort of an issue for me on the Zoom F series recorders, and it wasn't horrible. They just sounded kind of tinny, and if I have to listen to it for a long time, the Zoom F4 and F8 headphone amplifiers started to kind of grate on my ears. This one sounds fantastic, but not only that, what this one is really good at, it produces a signal makes it very, very easy to detect when you have issues. And I noticed this on the job that I was shooting yesterday. It was a corporate shoot. It was really just a voiceover and for a screencast. And this worked really, really nicely. I was able to hear in the room things that I don't normally necessarily hear unless I really, really crank the volume up on the Zoom F series recorder. So this is a huge improvement. And then right underneath it is the encoder that allows you to adjust the volume there. So, and it's indented. Or is that the right word? Idented. So it kind of moves from one to the next setting and works very nicely. Next up, we have the aux mic in. It's a 3.5 millimeter input jack. What that is for is a variety of things, actually. It's assignable, so you can change what it does. You can connect, for example, a lavalier microphone to that to bring it in. And that's actually becomes inputs 5 and 6 at that point, which is why they call this the MixPre-6. And if you were wondering, because here inputs 3 and 4 on XLR, they only have 4 XLR combo TRS inputs, but here's where you get 5 and 6. And you can feed not only a microphone, say, for example, a lavalier, but you could also feed other inputs there too. So if you wanted to get something from an iPhone or something, some music in here, you could do that as well. But this port can also be used for other auxiliary purposes. So if you have an external timecode generator, like, say, for example, a Tentacle Sync or anything from ambient sound or timecode systems or whatever it may be, you can actually connect it here and set the settings on the menu so that this becomes a timecode input as well. And it records the timecode to metadata. So it doesn't take up one of your audio tracks in doing that, which is a very nice feature. So in addition to that, and while we're on the topic of timecode, there is also this micro HDMI input right here, which can also take timecode from your camera or any other sort of a device that has an HDMI timecode feed. In this case, I tested it with my Panasonic GH5, and not only does it feed timecode to the recorder so that I can very simply sync my video with my audio in post, but what it also does is it triggers this to start recording when the Panasonic GH5 starts recording. So that's a really nice feature as well. Works beautifully with the GH5 in my tests so far, and we'll come back and talk about it in more detail when I have more experience with it in the final review. Let's take a look at the back panel, but before I do that, I'm going to plug this USB-C power in because I want to show you some things back here. All right, back on the back, we have the battery pack. And underneath the battery pack, we have the SD card, and we also have a, well, let's go ahead and show you. I'm going to go ahead and pull this off. Now, a few people expressed some concern and said this looked kind of cheap. It is plastic, this part right here. The rest of the body is a very strong aluminum, and it's very tough, feels very, very tough and very solid. This is plastic, but actually it seems better than I expected. It's a kind of a, it's pliable, but it seems very, very strong, as if you dropped this, that it would probably survive it. And if it didn't survive it, it's replaceable as well. But what's really cool about it, too, is this design. There's a hook that hooks in on this side, and then you have the release on this side. So with one hand, I can release the entire thing just like that. And you can see here we have our 4, in this case, Eneloop Pro batteries. So you can also buy one that will house 8 AA batteries. You can also buy one that will allow you to use Sony NPF style batteries. And there's also an AC adapter. So there are a variety of different options. You can see our SD card here. I'm not going to pop that out because we're recording right now. But we also have in here this Allen wrench or hex wrench that allows you to do some things here that we'll talk about in just a minute. So that's always with you. And again, popping it back in, again, is a one-handed affair, which is nice. It's very tough. The retention system on this is really, really good. So pulling it doesn't seem to create any sort of issues. So pretty happy with what they did there. The powering options are quite good. You know, it would be nice to have a Hirose or Hirose or Hirose. There are lots of different ways to say that. Input for power, like the Zoom series recorders do. But the reality is those, you're kind of limited to fairly expensive battery systems when you're using a Hirose input. So this is a nice option. I really like the Sony NPF style batteries for audio recorders. They work really, really nicely. That's primarily how I power my 633. And it's great that you have an option here for that. All right, you also have a 1/4 screw on top that is recessed when you're not using it, but that's what the Allen wrench is for. It allows you to kind of pop that out, and it's just a matter of sticking the Allen wrench in here and tightening it up. And you can mount this underneath your camera between your tripod and your camera. So if you are a hybrid camera shooter or a DSLR shooter, that's a nice option as well. So you can keep your rig nice and small. Now, this can also act as an audio interface for your computer, and it works very nicely for that purpose. I was testing that out last night. If you get kind of tripped up, it took me a little bit to figure out how to do that. If you come in here to System, you'll change this little USB setting here to audio, and that'll allow you to use it as an audio interface. It took me a while to figure that out. In fact, I had to contact Sound Devices support. I did do a scan of the documentation, but didn't find out how to do that. And they very quickly got back with me and got that problem solved quickly. And that's one of the great things about Sound Devices. If you're considering who to invest in for your next recorder, I've had a great experience with Sound Devices support. They are very quick, so they'll turn around in 24 hours and get you what you need. And that's really kind of a thing that we often overlook in consumer level devices. But once you start relying on things like this, that's really helpful to have. Of course, you can record up to 24-bit, 192 kilohertz on the MixPre-6. I believe it's limited to 96 kilohertz on the MixPre-3. For me, I don't generally record in those, but there are a couple of circumstances where I do. If I'm recording some Foley or some sound effects where I know I'm going to need to slow it down. And in fact, I did that in a recent documentary. If you haven't seen, I'll leave a link here to a documentary my friend Levi and I shot about a guitar maker. And one of the things that Levi wanted to do is he wanted to shoot some of the footage of a chisel kind of shaping one of the ribs on the guitars in slow motion while it's, wood chips are flying and so on and so forth. And so that's where recording to a higher sample rate, like 192 kilohertz, is really helpful, because then you can slow it down and still have all the information you need. So not that something I would record to all the time, but there are cases where that's helpful. Now, one of the headline features here, of course, are the preamplifiers, which are now called the Kashmir preamps on the MixPre-3 and MixPre-6. You have heard them, so you know what they sound like now, at least in general terms. We'll probably try to get some more audio samples of different voices other than just mine. But I've been very, very happy with it so far. It has up to 75 decibels of gain, plus some additional gain on the output stage. I think it's another 18 dB or something like that. So plenty of gain for pretty much any microphone you could possibly ever want to use. So really happy with that. These are discrete preamps, Class A preamps, which means that they actually are made with discrete electronic components. So it's not just an off-the-shelf, third-party integrated circuit preamplifier that a lot of the other lower-end recorders use. This is a really high-quality preamp designed by Sound Devices and built with discrete components. So really getting, I think, great value for your money here. Now, what's also very, very interesting is that they've also brought their analog limiters to the Sound Devices MixPre-3 and 6. So let me just do a demonstration here. I know people like to laugh at this, but we're going to do it. I'm going to take the gain way up. And we're going to check the limiters here. So I'm going to get up really close to this, and you're going to hear exactly what happens when the limiter is engaged. When those orange lights go on, that's when the limiter is engaged. And this probably sounds not very great, but you can see how it's managing those spikes and not allowing them to completely distort, which is not something you would get on any other sub $1,000 recorder that I'm aware of. So that is a huge, huge feature on the Sound Devices MixPre-3 and 6, where you have the safety of those limiters, which will help prevent cases where suddenly the talent gets super loud, they laugh, they scream, whatever it may be, and you don't get the distortion that normally comes along with that. So super nice feature. Not, again, anything that I've seen in this price range before. Now, the way that other, I think, manufacturers address this is if they are, I guess, genuine enough to recognize that they don't have proper limiters, because almost all of them have limiters, but they are implemented as digital limiters. And the problem with digital limiters is that the distortion already has happened in the signal chain before a digital limiter can do anything about it. So those are pretty much useless, but at least from a production standpoint. But what those manufacturers often do is create safety track recording. And some people have asked whether or not the Sound Devices MixPre-3 or 6 have that. My sense is I didn't see it anywhere. I think the answer is no, it does not have safety track recording. My take is it doesn't need it. That, again, is like a consolation prize that those other manufacturers give you when they know you don't have a proper limiter. So I wouldn't sweat it too much. Don't worry about that if that's a feature you want to use. Also, that's kind of the reason I call it a consolation prize is, yeah, it works if you have your gain set low enough in the second, the second of the dual recording tracks, but it's a lot of work in post to kind of fit that in. So it's not an ideal solution from any standpoint, and I would much rather have a high quality limiter like we have here in the Sound Devices MixPre-6. Now, as you may have seen in, let's take a look here in the menus. Coming back into the input here, you can see we do have a low cut filter, also called a high pass in many cases. It is adjustable, so you can change it from 40 hertz, bump it all the way up here to 160 hertz. You can hear that probably changes the sound a little bit, but this is super useful for eliminating any sort of hum that you may get. Sometimes when you have wind, you may need to apply a high pass filter or a low cut filter, and it's great to have it on the device itself. I believe it's an analog low cut as well. I'll need to confirm that in the final review, but that's also great because it saves you headroom, and you don't overwhelm the preamplifiers when you have a lot of low frequency energy that is not something you really want in your recording anyway. So really great to have that. Let's give you a little comparison in terms of size to some other recorders here. I'm going to go ahead and pull out this power because we don't need that anymore. Just to kind of give you a sense for the size of the MixPre-3 and how that kind of stacks up against other recorders. Let's just show you some common examples. Here is a Zoom H4n. It's about the same thickness, actually. About the same size this way, but of course it's quite a bit deeper. So, and then just for comparison, actually we don't have one here, but the MixPre-3 is smaller still than the MixPre-6 by a fair margin, by quite a bit. Like I was surprised at how the MixPre-3 made the MixPre-6 look enormous. And the MixPre-6 is actually not terribly enormous, it's quite small. Another device that many of you may be familiar with is the Tascam DR60D Mark II, just again to give you a sense for size. I would much rather put the MixPre underneath my camera than the Tascam, mainly because this is much sturdier. Again, aluminum, very solid. I've had people tell me that this has fallen off their tripod and this entire quarter penny tap just completely popped off the case altogether. But again, of course, it's not a fair comparison. I'm not trying to be fair here. This is still a great device for, sub $200, but just to give you a sense for the size. And then next up, the Zoom F8. I guess we're going to put this one underneath the Sound Devices. It is actually significantly smaller than the Zoom F8. The Zoom F4, incidentally, is virtually identical in size to the F8, so this would be a fairly good comparison for that as well. You can see that the Sound Devices is a fair bit smaller, both in all dimensions, actually. Try to line it up there. MixPre has both an advanced and a basic mode. I have an advanced mode. What's interesting is that the advanced mode gives you a lot more access to more advanced features. But if you don't want that, if you want something that's very simple, and you're not like you want great audio, but you don't want to necessarily have to spend all the time it takes to learn how to kind of fine-tune things, you can get great sound with this still. Just put it in basic mode, and then it's very simple. You pretty much adjust this to get your levels where you want them and press record and go. So it has a little bit of something for everyone, I suppose, if you want to look at it in those terms. I will almost always use it in advanced mode, but for other people that don't want to, there's another option there. Now, one thing that's very cool and that Sound Devices has done also, Zoom did on their Zoom F8 recorder, but not on their F4, is that Sound Devices has created an app called Wingman. And what Wingman does is connects to your MixPre, and you can see there it just connected, and this is exactly what happens here. You can see you get meters, but you also get, you can do a variety of different meters and different views for your meters. So here's left, right, camera 1, camera 2, USB 1, and USB 2. Here's left, right, input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So those are the two different meter views. You can do it this way instead if you prefer. And I think that's the same there. You can also take a look at your file list. If I wanted to come in here, I can actually enter some of the metadata right here. So I can give the tracks names, I can add notes. It's a take number, the name of the file, so on and so forth. So it's a pretty simple, straightforward app, but it's kind of nice. You can also start and stop recording. You can undo or false take. And again, all sorts of, it's a nice little control app. What you cannot do is, it's not made for mixing. You still need to do that over here, but it is a good way to keep eyes on your levels. So if you're operating camera and you want to be able to view this as well, you can do that. You can bring this over by your camera and keep an eye on things. So kind of a cool addition. Now, there are a few things that the MixPre series does not have, and I want to be careful how I say this because here's my overall impression with the MixPre-6 so far. Again, I've only had it for 48 hours. I think this is a fantastic device. I think Sound Devices has done a great job deciding what were the most important features to get in here and still stay under $1,000. And in the case of the MixPre-3, stay at $650. So they obviously, when you design something and you have constraints in terms of pricing, there are some things you have to give up. So I think that the Sound Devices MixPre series, that I think they made some great decisions on what to give up, what features not to include. Some people may disagree with me, and it depends on what you're doing, what your particular use cases are, and what you're recording. So let me talk about some of those. So one thing, and this is not a deal killer, but these are actually faders. They're in advanced mode at least. So what that means in practical terms is that when I go to set the gain at the start of the shoot, I need to come into my input menu and set the gain right here in the menu, and then I use the fader while recording to adjust the overall level. So you can see here that changed the stereo mix there. So this affects the stereo mix and not the actual isolated recording itself. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're doing a stereo feed from this to your camera, then yeah, these will control the overall contribution of this particular channel to the overall mix, the loudness, if you will, of that particular channel. So just something to understand. That's not a downside. It's just something to consider. As we saw when we took off the battery in the back, there is only one SD card, so there is no redundant recording, unfortunately. Is that a deal breaker? You'll have to decide for yourself whether that is a deal breaker. For me, it's not generally for the cases where I'll be using this. For example, yesterday I was doing a voiceover for a recording at work, and it worked just fine. There was no problem. Even if I had lost power, we could have done a retake for that particular piece. We kind of broke it up into segments, so it wouldn't have been a complete deal breaker. But if I'm going to be on a large set, I'm hired as a sound guy, and I'm going to be on a larger set with a larger crew, I don't want to be the guy that has to cause a retake if my batteries run out or whatever. So in that case, yeah, I think using a recorder like my 633 makes a lot more sense. So you have to decide for yourself how critical that is, but that is a feature it does not have. Now, may just be me at this point, but I didn't see a way in advanced mode to tell it not to record the stereo mix and just record the isolated track. So what I mean by that, you can see on the meter here, the two top bars are what's called the mix, and the bar below that is my channel 1 input. If we had 3 other microphones, you'd see those bouncing around down below channel 1 there. And what's happening here is that each of the individual microphones are being recorded to their own separate track, and then the top 2, the mix, is a mix of all of the other 4 microphones. Or in this case, it's only just 1 microphone. So I didn't see a way, and this is actually what is called producing a poly wave file. So when I open up this file on my computer, in this particular case, there'll be 3 tracks, or 3 channels on that one track. So I can break that out. If I don't want the stereo mix anymore, I can get rid of those 2 and just use the isolated, or whatever it is I want to do. It would be nice if I could turn that off, and in a lot of the higher end recorders you can turn it off. But I didn't see a way to do that here. And for me here, not even remotely close to a deal breaker issue. One other thing I noticed is I did a test where I did a 1 minute and 15-second recording. I pulled the battery pack out at 1 minute and 15 seconds to see if the file would still work or if it was corrupted. And what some of the higher end recorders do is that as they're recording, they'll actually periodically close the file and write the metadata, and then continue recording and continue adding new information to that file. The benefit of that is that if you lose power at some point, you won't lose the entire take. Unfortunately, this does not appear to have done that in that particular case. I'll talk to Sound Devices here and see if that feature is included here. Again, is that a critical thing for the type of work you're doing? It depends. If you're doing you don't have any sort of backup, if you're not recording to your camera and this at the same time, and you can't afford to lose a take, then you probably need to look at other options. But again, I'll talk with Sound Devices here and see if that's a feature that is included, and maybe it writes every 2 minutes or something, and that's why I didn't get it at 1 minute. But whatever the case, something to consider, and I'll look at that more closely in the final review. So overall, there are my first impressions of the MixPre from Sound Devices. So far, my impression is it is a fantastic recorder. I think it has a fantastic feature set. I'm really happy with it. I think the preamplifiers sound great to my ears. The headphone amplifier is very, very nice. And overall, again, the feature set is just really good. I think they've done a nice job. Does it have everything? Is it perfect? No. It, for the price that you're paying to get it, I think it's a really, really good device, and I'm looking forward to working with it more. We'll have a full review coming up here in the next few weeks once I have a little bit more experience with it. If you have any questions or things that you want to know about the MixPre series, go ahead and leave those down below, and we will talk to you again soon.